where we sit down with real people from inside Formula One and actually talk.
A big part of what we do as Team Rascasse beyond the competition is understanding what F1 actually looks like as a career. And today we got to sit down with someone right at the center of it. Ahuja works as a hydraulic engineer at Mercedes F1, and we asked him everything today. Let's get into it. I really just want to get to know how you work around in that circuit. One of my first questions is, race weekends are absolutely, I think they would be really hard to get some sleep and actually get some rest for yourself. So how are you holding up this week, first of all?
So in Formula One, because our team is 1,000 people big, 1,000 people strong. So actually, the race team is kind of a separate department within a Formula One team. So, if you look at a standard company, they will have, let's say, marketing department, HR department, finance department, facilities, engineering, technical, whatever. So in F1, they have a separate department called race team. And this race team is kind of, it draws on people from all across the business. So you will have people from marketing, people from engineering, people from technical, people who are physiotherapists, people who are nutritionists, etc. And they become the race team, and they are the ones who actually travel around to all the races. So my job is actually factory-based. I'm not in the race team, so I don't actually go around to the races, similar to most of the employees actually, because like I said, the team is over 1,000 people, and the race team department is less than 100 people who actually go to the races. So I don't travel, but yes, the people who travel, it's a very hectic lifestyle for them, because you've got 22, 23 races. And so if you imagine in terms of weeks, you have to fly to the race in advance, set up, then the race weekend is Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Then you need to strip everything down, pack it, and then go on to the next race. So for them, it's quite difficult and challenging, because they spend a lot of the time at airports and hotel rooms. And, you might say, oh, you guys get to see all of these races around the places around the world. But actually, they're like, we get to an airport. From the airport, taxi picks us up, takes us to the hotel. From the hotel, we sleep or, get ready, whatever. And then we go directly to the track. So they're like, we see airport, hotel, racetrack, airport, hotel, racetrack. And they're like, sometimes you wake up and you're staring at the ceiling of the hotel room, and you're almost thinking, God, which country am I in now? That's a different challenge for them. But for them, I guess, performing under pressure becomes quite critical. So we do a lot of training internally on how can you continuously perform under pressure? How do you maximize your sleep, your nutrition? Because if you imagine someone who is in Canada and then suddenly, does a race in Canada and then has to come and do a race in Europe, there's a big jet lag time difference. So if there's a race from one weekend to the next, so they need to learn to, how to maximize sleep too, because you will not perform well if you are jet lagged, if you're tired. So for them, a lot of the focus is on how do you get your sleep and nutrition right.
The next question is, hydraulics sounds like a very specific path into the F1 team. Was that always the plan? Were you always aiming to go into that field, or was it something else?
Good question. I think I was always just interested in, being an engineer on the parts of the car, and maybe more to the mechanical side than composites. But then I guess hydraulics, I fell into it because I used to work very closely with the powertrain department. So these were the people, we wouldn't get the engine, anything behind the engine really. So the gearbox, how do you transfer power from the engine to the wheels, the cooling of the engine, etc. So I was buying a lot of components which were related to that. So because I was so heavily involved with the powertrain department, my links and connections with them allowed me to switch after a 10-year career in purchasing. So they're like, well, you studied engineering 11 years ago. How are you going to be relevant? So it was on the strength of those connections that I had made that I was able to switch to engineering. And the thing with hydraulics is that it relies a lot on mechanical engineering components that you would do anyway if you were a mechanical engineer. But then you also have to work with these really high pressure fluids. So a standard F1 car is, for example, 220 bar of pressure. Atmosphere is 1 bar. So, this is very high pressure. So, and the components are very minuscule. So you have to you have to work to very fine tolerances. So I quite enjoy that challenge.
That's amazing. This is kind of like more just to get to know you. But what's something about your job that even your closest friends don't understand?
I think just the sheer pace and how quickly we need to develop from one part to the next. So, you can have a race weekend, you can have a failure during that race weekend, and then you need to be able to very quickly, without sometimes even seeing the parts, because the parts could be in transit from one country to the back to base. So sometimes you don't even get to see the parts, but you have to try and use good engineering judgment and knowledge. And a lot of F1 relies on good communication with people, because the demands can be changing all the time. So it's by being able to speak to like different engineers who've been there for many years, for their experience, speaking to the technicians who actually put the parts together. So the mechanics actually play a very crucial role. So sometimes it's relying that I don't know the answer, and the answer may not even be the right answer, but you have to rely on good engineering knowledge and having the humility of speaking to the people actually putting the parts together to understand what can be a short-term fix, a medium-term fix, and then when you finally get the parts, do a deep dive understanding how you can fix it for future. So it's that communication is actually more important almost than sometimes the engineering.
That's great. When the season goes quiet, like when the races are over, how does like life look for you? Like when there is almost no workload?
So that's actually quite the opposite. So when the season finishes is when the workload is extremely high, and especially when I was in procurement, because if you imagine when the season is going, everyone is just focused on the smaller upgrades from one race to the next. So when the season finishes is then when everyone is working on the next year's car, which is not yet released. And there is a very small, finite amount of time from the season finishing in late November, sometimes even December, and then testing starting in like February. So then you have that really small time period in which you have to build a brand new car. So especially when I was in purchasing, that used to be really the busiest period for us, because we were trying to like buy these thousands of parts across the car, and some of these can actually be on a very long lead time because you are dealing with specialist suppliers. So sometimes like the bearings on the car or the gearbox components within the car, they can take 12 months just to buy the raw material, the steel, and then another 4 months, 6 months to actually make the components. So when in purchasing, I needed to have really good relationships with my suppliers so that we could actually deliver in time. So it's really hard for the people in procurement, but it's also quite hard for the engineers because they need to keep releasing parts to like a very fixed, almost immovable project plan.
Right.
So downtime. So to answer your question, what you think is downtime is not really downtime. It's actually a really busy period. So it's actually in the summer when the season is ongoing, where people are actually able to take a holiday. So around August time, all the F1 teams have a 2-week shutdown. So that's when many people over here will go on holiday. And then obviously around Christmas time, being in Europe, so they have almost a week holiday around Christmas time. So many people take holiday then to be with family and friends. So those are the main periods when people take downtime.
Okay.
Right. As a person who is very curious to get into Formula One after completing my education, I'd like to ask you, growing up in India, how realistic did a career in Formula One, especially 10, 20 years back, how realistic was it?
Yeah, very good question, because My parents, my friends literally did not understand this mania, this craziness I had saying, oh, I want to go and work in F1. They're like, we just watch something on TV and it's just cars going around in circles. But for me, it was like, I actually want to be designing parts on that car. So yeah, no one understood. So even for me, I didn't even assume I could get into Formula One. So I was like, okay, I'll do automotive engineering. And then when I was doing automotive engineering, mechanical engineering, I did some internships with BMW in Germany, with kind of a factory which makes engines for Ford and GM. Because I was in Canada, they were quite big over there. I even did one in my first internship was actually at Maruti in Gurgaon. So, so I didn't even imagine I could get into motorsports. But then once I graduated, I was like, like the teachers in school, you've got to shoot for the stars. So I was like, well, why don't I try and get into motorsports? So
Why not?
from my batch, I'm the only international student still left working in motorsports. So it is a very demanding and very competitive sector. So yeah, I think there's a lot of luck involved in me actually staying.
Right. That was honestly a very inspiring answer. I would also like to ask you one thing. If there was a decision you made early on in your life that you would secretly and quietly want to go back and change, what would it be?
So again, not knowing how to get into F1 and what to do. Like when I was doing engineering, I did my internships in a way that I tried to do lots of different aspects of the car. So, sorry, not of the car, but of the industry. So my first internship at Maruti was kind of tool and die design engineer, and then the second one I worked at BMW. That was kind of looking at materials research and testing. And then the third one was at a company called Nimac, who do casting. So that was more looking at production. Um, we've got these engine blocks on the production line. How can we improve the processes and quality of it? And then my fourth one was kind of looking at more lean management. Okay, now we've got again back at BMW working on the BMW M engines, saying okay, we've now got engines running. How can we make the process leaner and more efficient? So that was in my mind. I was trying to cover lots of different sectors and areas available within the industry. But if you want to get, I guess, into motorsports, then you kind of need to try and look up what sort of jobs there actually are, and then figure out which one interests you, and then try and do something similar, which will try and get you more experience in that sector. And also, everyone says, "Oh, I want to work in Formula One, for example," but then people don't do. It's like lots of people have passion for F1, and they're like, "Oh, I've been watching races or whatever," and many people will say, "Oh, I've studied engineering and I've got excellent grades." But the thing is, because it's such a competitive sector, there's lots of people who have passion and who've got very good grades. So you need to have something special, something extra, and that's what I wish I had done more of as well. So one, looked at jobs to know which ones I really wanted to target for, and then done my internships to focus more and more on that, firstly. And then secondly, it's not sufficient to just say I have a passion for it and I've got really good grades in university. You need to be able to show that, look, in all of my spare time, I went and I volunteered with this team. Even if I was cleaning tires, where possible, I was trying to look at their data. I became a mechanic, so I was able to take apart the parts and put them together. Because when you're able to, and lots of my European colleagues actually have this, because they were mechanics first and then they became engineers. So when they have to design a new part, they can already understand from a mechanic's viewpoint what's the pros and cons of the design and what they can actually improve on it. So that's two things which I wish I could do more of.
Right. Very insightful. I gotta say to you. One question off the script. I want to ask, when you see the cars that you have helped build perform so good, especially after the rise of Kimi Antonelli and George Russell recently, how do you feel? Like the proudness and the compassion, how does it feel?
Yeah, definitely. So I think sport, gives you the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. So, when, and it's a competitive sport. So as you can imagine, there's 11 teams on the F1 grid. Everyone, no matter which team you are in, has put their blood, sweat, and tears into, hard work and effort into designing their cars. So I'll start with the lows first. If you imagine you could be at Aston Martin where you think you've made all the best choices, but then things out of your control mean your car's not performing well. So that's soul crushing. It's destroying. And also, for us, where we could be at a race where our driver is in the lead of the race, and then suddenly you have a reliability failure and the car stops on track. So you don't even finish and you get 0 points. So, that's all very soul destroying. Or then you have the alternative. So for me, one of my big key moments was the 2017 car, which was my first, the 2013 Lotus F1 team car, the 2017 car, my first car at Mercedes, and then the 2020 car, which was, the black monster. So, and then when you see that car and you go just see it absolutely dominate, that feeling is just puts you on like the high. You feel like on the top of the world when that happens.
Right. Working so close to Formula One, have you ever had like a run through with the drivers? Have you ever get a chance to properly meet them, talk to them about the car and everything?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, because it's a biggish team, like 1,000 people, so mostly the drivers stay with their engineers. So with the race team, because it forms a very strong team bond with them. So because they spend so much time in hotels, at the circuits, at the airports, waiting for connections, whatever. So they become family. So the drivers generally stay with their race engineers, but we're still all teammates. So they will still like go around, and F1 is a team sport because it's not just the drivers. They need a car underneath them, and the car is made by 1,000 people. If I take Mercedes' team, and another 1,000 making the engine. So it's everyone working together to deliver the car. And therefore, the drivers also end up talking with the other people in the team. So I've had run-ins, I've had lunch with like Lewis, and, where he was asking me about where I've come from, what I've done. And, sometimes you see George coming out of the simulator and you're like, hey, George. And he's like, hey, how you doing? We've had Christmas parties where, George has just suddenly come downstairs and we were all dancing together. So yeah, I've got like videos on my phone where we're all dancing with George. And then again, my wife has just given birth to like a baby girl. So the team has basically given her like a baby onesie, which is like a Mercedes race suit. So every race weekend, she's wearing that. And then I bumped into Kimi Antonelli once in the factory, and I was showing him photos of this. So I said, look, when she grows up and grows out of this, I would like you to sign this. And he's like, yeah, of course, like I would love to. So yeah, the driver's actually quite friendly and approachable.
That's honestly very fun to hear.
So basically, I'm asking you that if you had to give yourself a message when you were 17, what would it actually be?
I think the message is kind of what I told you from my journey, is that, you will have lots of like setbacks and knockdowns. So, I did my bachelor's degree. I thought, great, I'm now ready to go out in the world and join a car company. And then the financial crisis happened. So that was things out of my control, where I couldn't find a job. And then again, I did my motorsports degree. Being an international student, it was very difficult to find a job in Europe, in the UK, because I needed a work permit. So I couldn't actually originally get a job in a F1 team because, like I said, it's very competitive. So that was a setback. Then I finally got a job with a small car company startup, got laid off. So that's another setback. So, sometimes you get lots of setbacks and you just need to kind of stand up, dust yourself off, and then just go again. So I've sent hundreds and thousands of CVs, to try and job applications to try and get a job with teams with other car companies, or even with suppliers for motorsports teams. So, you always keep getting setbacks, and you just have to be able to stand up and go again. And actually, it's the same in F1. Niki Lauda used to say for us. Do you guys know Niki Lauda?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
So Niki Lauda would always tell us, he's like, the day that we lose, the day that we have a car failure, is the biggest learning day for us, because that's when we actually learn what's going wrong with our car and how can we come back even stronger. Because when you win, you've not got anything to fix. You're like, oh, great, everything went very well. Everything is great. Let's keep doing the same thing. But the days you have failures are the biggest learning days, where you can actually learn and grow on how to make yourself better. So I think that's what I would tell my 17-year self.
What's the thing people get most wrong about what it's like to work in F1? Like, we have seen the F1 movie. Is it like similar to that, or is it completely different thing?
No, so I think what the F1 movie gets wrong is, it's Hollywood. So it's designed, shows you like 2-3 characters, but actually it's thousands of people in the team. So, there's not sometimes one big strong voice making, saying, oh, this is what I'm going to do. And like, if the driver was to do what Brad Pitt did, then I think that driver would be facing disciplinary action within the team. But I think what people get wrong is that a lot of it's a team sport, that there's lots of people working together to deliver this car. And I think people do understand, but it's actually very competitive. So, there's a lot of like hard work where, you sacrifice your weekends to go to do races, etc. So what you see people working in F1, like they've all potentially done a lot of like other jobs to try and get into F1 beforehand.
I'd like to ask a few questions regarding what goes around your mind when it's the weekend, the race weekend. So, could you walk us through a race weekend from your perspective? What are you actually doing while the rest of us are watching the formation lab, sitting at a home in comfort?
Well, like I said, I'm factory based, so I'm also kind of doing similar to you, sitting back in comfort watching the race. But I guess I'll start with my purchasing days. So when I was in procurement, for us, the race weekend kind of actually started 2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks before the race, where, even longer, where, we've got like a big project plan, and okay, we've got Silverstone coming, which is our next race. And then Silverstone is where we're going to have this next big upgrade. So you're kind of working backwards to say, I need to speak to my suppliers. We've got this big upgrade coming, speak to the engineers, figure out, what are you going to develop for, what's the new performance upgrades coming for this car upgrade. And then working with suppliers to like make sure we have capacity available so that they can machine the parts. Because a general project plan, everyone is kind of saying, okay, I spoke to the supplier, I spoke to the designer says it'll take me 1 week. Sometimes they might run a bit late, let's say 1.5 weeks. Then you speak to the supplier, they say, oh, I'll need 2 weeks. You'll say, let's assume 2.5 weeks. So every time, you kind of build in some comfort into the equation. So then the time taken from start to finish, you've added a lot of like extra time into the delivery. Whereas in F1, we're almost like, okay, what is the bare minimum time you need? And that's what you write down. And then again, comes back to communication. You're really pushing on the designers, you're pushing on the suppliers, you're pushing on everyone to make sure that they're trying to hit that time that they have promised. So 80%, 90% of the times we will deliver performance in the shortest amount of time possible. And then obviously 10, 20% of the times it falls out of that window. So in procurement and similarly in engineering, the work starts even earlier until you get to the race weekend. And then when you're there, the mechanics have built up the car, you've potentially got some data to say, oh, we've put these parts together, there's a fault, this thing is not working. So in your mind, you're already thinking, it's like, oh, the car is not 100% when it's at the racetrack. We know of some faults on it already. and you hope that you keep your fingers and toes crossed that nothing goes wrong. So sometimes when you're watching the race, you're like, I really hope this part, nothing goes wrong with it. And then as the race is going on, then you're really hoping that, no one crashes. And sometimes, especially last few races, when you saw like George and Kimi racing quite closely to each other, you're like, oh my God, please don't crash, please don't crash. And many times it's happened where the drivers have crashed, and you're like, in my head, I'm already thinking, great, I'm going to go back to the office on Monday. I already know I will have to, it's going to be a really busy Monday to try and figure out what all parts are broken, what all parts need replacing. And that's during my purchasing days. And now on the engineering side, it's similar, it's you kind of have the concern of the parts you've designed that everything works well. And then sometimes when the car shuts down, no one knows actually what's gone wrong apart from the people who are looking at the data. But then, commentators will say, oh my God, look, it's a hydraulic failure, it's a gearbox failure. And then many times we're looking and we're like, no, the data is saying it's a electrical fault or something, and the car has shut down. But they're like, oh, look, the driver's like lost drive completely or something. So, sometimes the commentators say something, but what you see happening in the data is completely different.
They like to make it more engaging so that, more people watch and have fun.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's what happens, where the work actually starts a lot earlier than the race weekend. So race weekend is almost a culmination of all that effort coming together. And you hope it goes well, but then you're always kind of keeping fingers and toes crossed that things actually pan out as you expect.
That's actually great to know, sir.
I have a question before we move further. As we have a race today in Austria, what are some insights that you're obviously allowed and you would like to tell us about today's race?
Well, so we basically, I don't know if other teams do it, but at least within Mercedes, we've got whatever the senior trackside engineers, they will send us an email saying, look, this happened on Friday. They give us a summary of what happened with tire prep, or which way we were heading towards car setup. And then they will give an outlook, what do we expect for qualifying? And then, for example, now the email recap saying, well, this happened with the yellow flags, but we think it was clear because on George's dash. So I don't know if you saw, but in qualifying, it was quite a dramatic qualifying for Max and for George. So Max crashed, and then as Kimi Antonelli was going through that sector, he thought he saw double waved yellows, so he completely backed off and aborted his lap, which is what you're supposed to do if it's double yellows. But George, has more experience than Kimi, so he's like, no, actually, on my dashboard, it's only telling me that it's a single yellow, and if it's a single yellow, you don't have to abort your lap as long as you can clearly show that you have slowed down, because the single yellow means that there's caution, there could be something on track, or be prepared to take action. So as long as you can show you have slowed down, you're fine. So George was, that's where experience comes in. So he was just able to back off, clear that area where the yellow flag was, and then once it went back to green flag, he was then able to put the throttle down again and get pole position. So then people were saying, oh, but it shouldn't have been a single yellow flag, it should have been a double yellow flag. But that's not got anything to do with the driver. That's to do with, how the FIA decides. And generally it's the marshals who decide first whether it will be single yellow, double yellow. And don't forget, F1 is such a fast sport. So it can even be fractions of a second. So when they switched from single yellows to double yellows, George had already gone through that when it was single yellow. So it's got nothing to do with the driver's decision. And, just is that inertia it takes from seeing what was happening, the data getting relayed from trackside to the FIA, who make the decision, who then switch the signaling. So, yeah. So, just getting that insight from the inside perspective is quite interesting.
Yesterday's race, the qualifiers was extremely crazy, especially in the last minute. everything just happened in a rush.
Which circuit genuinely excites you when it comes up on the calendar? Like, you must have a favorite one.
I really enjoy Silverstone. So Silverstone, Spa in Belgium are two of my favorites, and Montreal actually in Canada. Those three I think always make for some really exciting racing. And even if I look at some of my highlights, it's like again being with Mercedes, like St. Louis. I think in 2021 was it? I'm very bad with like my memory when it comes to races. I have colleagues who remember literally everything, like every corner, what happened. But there was this race where Lewis had a puncture, and suddenly last lap he was down to the 3 tires, and he still managed to cross and like win ahead of Max. So, again, you're asking about how does it feel as on the race weekend being a member of the team. At that time, my heart was just like going like a hammer, like so yeah.
I would say for our team, it's definitely Monaco, because like our team's name is based upon Monaco. Rascasse is a turn.
I could tell, yes.
Yeah, Rascasse.
So for us, I can confidently say that Monaco is most probably our best favorite circuit.
Nice.
Right.
So one last question from my side. What would you suggest the students who are aspiring to get into F1 or who are already in the STEM racing sector as we are? Like, if a STEM racing student is watching this and wants to eventually land a role like yours, what's the one thing they should be doing right now? And most of them probably aren't doing that.
Like I said before, I think most people say, okay, I just need good grades so I can get into good university. And that's not enough, because F1 is very competitive. People from around the world want to join an F1 team. So there's how many schools in India, how many schools in China, in across Europe, America, South America, Africa. So you can imagine the best students from all of these classes, if they, there's, let's say, even 1% who want to get into STEM or are in STEM, there's not even so many jobs available in Formula One.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to think, what else can I do? So many people will try and join like volunteering groups, like, they will go-kart racing, and then they will say, look, I've joined this go-kart racing team, but then I can confidently tell you, I have stripped apart the go-kart, I have put it back together, I know what gets me performance with the tires, how can I tweak the suspension, how can I tweak the engine, and then kind of moves on from there, where they're like, right, I used to do go-karts when I was your age, as in you guys, and then they're like, well, once I was in university, I started actually volunteering with a Formula 4 team or a Formula 3 team, or I started, volunteering with a GT team, so like GT cars. So then, you get a lot more professional experience on how to do the same thing. So I think that's actually one of the most important things, that everyone will say, I'm passionate, but like, what are you actually doing about that passion to show you are really keen and interested in that sector?
Right. Thank you so much, sir. That was a great answer.
And that's the thing, like, it's not just STEM, because F1, like I said, has all sorts of jobs available. So, like Suhani said, she wants to do marketing. So it's, even if you want to do marketing, so F1 is a sport. So it's like, how can you do sports marketing? So, can you work with another sports team somewhere? A team will want sponsorship. So how can you confidently prove, saying, look, I want to get into marketing in Formula One. I've actually worked with a sports team. I've managed to get them this amount of sponsorship and revenue. So if you can show that you have something similar and you've done, what have you done to, make yourself have all the skills you need for motorsports, is quite important. So it applies to literally each and every sector.
Right. As the sponsorship analyst, that was a really good insight for me as well. I would like to ask you, like, a lot of our viewers who are watching this podcast, it's not live, but who are going to be watching this podcast, are the students who are participating in the same competition as we are. So what do you think, in your opinion, what separates teams, like in engineering, like what impresses engineers and what what is like, yeah, this is common, but something else is unique. So like, what's the difference that you all look for?
So I think, like I said, there's smart people across up and down the grid. So there isn't like one thing which is, only the big teams impress. Like even the smaller teams, they can be on a very tight budget. So like a bigger team, well, now actually the budgets are all the same because of cost cap. But I think you can have really innovative ideas even on like the smaller teams. So I think engineers will look at, we like all the teams employ like photographers with like big telescopic lenses, and they're all taking photos of all the cars in like different areas, so you can see how is the car reacting to a certain corner. Can you get like some top secret photos from inside the garage somewhere to see like what's their suspension, their cooling, their chassis layout, something else. And there's always something you learn from each and every car. And sorry, repeat your question please one more time.
What basically differentiates, like according to you, what will differentiate between teams, like in the engineering sector, of course?
Yeah. So I think it's not about working harder, it's about working smarter. So it's, everyone is doing hard work, but how can you put in place processes where no one is like trying to shout over one another, but you're all working together to say, okay, as an example, many years ago, like I said, Mercedes engines make the engine, and the Mercedes chassis side, we would make the chassis. And then the brief used to be, okay, you guys do the engine, you make the best engine. You make the chassis, you make the best chassis. But then many times the decision for the engine might hamper the performance of the chassis, or similarly, something in the chassis might hamper the performance of the engine. So again, it comes down to collaboration, saying almost at a very early stage, saying, okay, how can we work together? I know that this decision will give you performance on the engine, but it really negatively impacts the performance of the chassis. So figuring out what's the most important thing, and then having the humility to say, okay, I understand it's not the best for my component, but overall, in the overall scheme, it's better for the team. And similarly, that's the same mindset we tell the drivers as well, saying, look, it's a team sport. You want to have all the pole positions, all the race wins, etc. But you have this car because of the 1,000 people back in the factory. So you have to think first and foremost also, how are you fitting in with the team? How are you going to help that team? So, we tell the driver saying, okay, before you start fighting, we have to prioritize that the team gets a result. So if you're fighting, you're losing time, you're maybe going to finish third and fourth instead of first and second. So that's quite important. Communication is king. Having the humility on realizing what's the biggest overarching ambition that we want to achieve, and then also making sure you're aiming for that, and being able to constructively challenge a colleague of yours to say, okay, why do you think you've done this? How can we review this? And I think you have idea A, I have idea B. How can we factually, like, instead of getting emotions involved, how can we factually figure out what is the best decision for the team?
I I am more interested in the fluid part of Formula One. So I see the future me in you. I think I have to get where you are. So that's actually my aim, and I'm working for it. Let's see what happens.
Very good, Varun. So when you say fluids, are you talking fluids as in the petrol in the car, or are you talking like fluids as in
No,
aerodynamics?
aero. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So again, people who have studied aerodynamics, they've done aeronautical engineering, they have done, many come from mathematical backgrounds. So they've studied, like Devinder said, they've actually studied maths at a very, very high level, sometimes even PhD level, and then gone into looking at, big Navier-Stokes equations, and then trying to figure out how can we, better analyze flow across the car. So, if you have a good understanding of the mathematics behind it, it can actually like lead you to better understand the fluid structures and how that's moving across the car. So there's many different ways of getting into aerodynamics.
I wanted to ask you, that if you could teach every STEM racing student one engineering principle from Formula One, what would it be and why?
I don't think there's one engineering principle because it really depends what part of the car you are working on. Formulas of what's a torque calculation. So that's force times radius, or F equals ma, F equals mg. So it's sometimes even basic calculations like that, but then you kind of build up on that. So you need to have like a good solid base of what you're studying in school, because that's what you build up in university, build up on that. And then when you actually start working, there can be a lot of things from school which you're not using immediately, but then you might like switch jobs, and then things, that's why you have to learn all of these things in school. You might your career might go in a very narrow focus one way, but then you might switch, and then suddenly you need to have a good understanding of like many other areas. So I think having those key fundamentals is the most important thing.
One more thing, I'm sorry to interrupt. It's like fluid mechanics will play fluid mechanics will also play a very important role, the aerodynamics. And I think the physics part should be strong.
Yes.
Being a physics teacher, I would say that. But I think there are so many things which they should learn at this stage of their, schooling, 11th and 12th standard, which actually play a key role in what you are pursuing in future.
Yeah.
Isn't it? 100%. I think you'll agree to me, no?
100%. And even people are like, what will differentiation and integration teach? But
absolutely,
even that, like I was explaining that, because these cars are hybrid, they have a brake-by-wire system. So you need a lot of software code and control for that. So that relies a lot on sort of differentiation and integration, because you look at, the driver has given a demand. How can you proportionally get very close to the amount of braking required? And then there's error correction. So then you have integration to then try and accelerate that demand to get closer to where you want to be. And then there's again error correction where you need differentiation to get back to the demand. So, you might think, oh, this is all crazy mathematics not required, but it definitely is. And even when you're talking aerodynamics, Navier-Stokes equation is partial differential equations.
Very important.
All of this is required. And again, like I said, I was working on the America's Cup. So this was sailing. So in the beginning, we were designing parts in aluminium, and they'd go racing on the sea. And we're like, well, aluminium, we'll have an aluminium oxide. Don't really need to protect the aluminium. But what happened? We ended up with galvanic corrosion. Galvanization, galvanic batteries, something we study in chemistry very early on. But that's what I said, it's that simple fundamental. Sometimes you forget because you've not studied it for such a long time. And then it comes to, really bite you in the bum. So you really need to, again, that's where humility comes in. You need to say, okay, let me just take out my old chemistry textbook, physics textbooks, mathematics textbook, engineering books. And then I still have, textbooks on my desk. And then sometimes I have to go read through those chapters again and again to try and understand. So exactly what Richa ma'am said is those fundamentals are the most important.
So I think what they learn here theoretically, that is applicable practically later on in all these kind of jobs, no?
We have a couple of questions that we want to ask you. It's kind of like a fun round. It's going to be like fun questions. Mm-hmm. The first question I would like to ask you is, who's better, George or Kimi?
Different strengths, so not one particular driver.
If you were to choose from the both of them, who will you choose?
I think I would go George just because he's got more experience. So, they're both excellent. So when you have to be an F1 driver, you're already like that top, not even 1%, 0.1%. So they're all excellent drivers. But George just has more experience at the moment. So, like the yellow flag situation, he just knew what to do. And I think cumulatively that might play in his favor as the season progresses. So similarly, if it was Lewis and George, I would have again gone for Lewis just because he's got that experience. He knows what it is to win championships. So yeah, so I think experience does count, but obviously then you kind of trade it off with the young maverick driver coming in where they're completely fearless and they just have more. I guess their skills, not skills, but reactions are a little bit sharper because they're just younger. So yeah,
If you
experience.
had one word to describe Mercedes, what would it be? One word, just one word. Team.
Team.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
So again, like that's one of the things I really love about F1. If you look at a standard company, there's always a lot of sort of infighting. People are like, well, we have this budget, but then the technical department wants it for something, marketing wants it for something else, and then accounts are like, no, but you can't spend this much, and then HR is like, we can't hire people because of the budget is not there. In F1, it's like, forget everything. It's like, what is the one thing? We want to win the Constructors' Championship, the Drivers' Championship. Okay, that's number one goal. What do we need to make this happen? We need to develop this technology. Okay, how do we find the budget? How do we all work together to make this happen? So it all comes down to team and collaboration. So team.
Right. Again, like I'm asking you a lot of driver-related questions because I'm more curious towards that side. Who do you think has the best chance of becoming the world champion this year?
A Mercedes driver.
Sorry?
A Mercedes driver.
Exactly.
Could be George, could be Kimi.
Because both of them are like at the top of the lead. Yeah, Hamilton is catching up, but it's still a little.
I love Lewis, but like, now he's a Ferrari driver, whereas I'm
a fellow Ferrari fan with all due respect to Mercedes.
No, not at all. That's the thing. Like in social media, everyone makes it sound like, oh, we all hate each other. But actually, when you speak to the employees who work in the teams, many people like move from one team to the other. So you've got friends across many different teams. So like I said, I used to work at Alpine before. And I have friends now who are in Aston, who are in Ferrari, in Cadillac, across the grid. So, we still catch up, and outside, when we're working, we're supporting our teams, but outside we're friends. So, you still hang out with each other. So completely no problem with whatever team you want to support.
At the end of the day, you all are like one community and you have to have each other's backs.
Exactly. Yeah.
Anyone else would like to ask anything? Sami, Raghav, Shiv, Ronak, Varun?
If you could shadow anyone else in the paddock for a day, who would it be and why?
I think in the paddock, it would be maybe Toto because, he speaks, I think, 5 languages or something. So, just how he goes about his day, I think would be quite interesting. So I think he's of Polish origin, grew up in Austria. So he speaks Polish, he speaks German, speaks English, he speaks Italian, he speaks French, he understands Spanish. So, just to understand how he goes about his day would be quite interesting. But I guess more on the technical side. Again, trackside, is quite specific because at that point you're only just you have a very limited amount of time. So you are really trying to focus on like getting performance out of the car at that time. So whereas when you're back in the factory, you have more bandwidth, more information available to really do a deep dive into what's causing the problem or how you can find performance on the car. So I think if I were to shadow someone on the track, then it would be Toto, just for the sheer entertainment value of like, how his day goes. But I wouldn't maybe learn that much on the engineering side.
If we ever have any query, we will definitely contact you.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I myself have come from many different sectors, so from procurement into engineering. So there's not just STEM, there's lots of other sectors as well in F1.
Definitely.
Thank you so much. It feels so nice talking to a fellow Ametian who's like making it big in the F1 world. It's really nice.
Very good. Great.
Yes.
All
Thank
right,
you.
Thank you,
everyone. All the
Ameya.
best.
Really